Thank you, Lord, for letting us be together and for what you're going to stimulate within us. And above all, Lord, we don't want to talk about you. We want to talk with you. So we invite your presence and your personhood to be upon us and in us and with us. And reveal yourself, we pray thee in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Well, this class, we solved all of Chris's problems last week. So tonight we can begin on the subject of this class. Nobody responded to that? Christology. Christology, which is the study of Jesus. So that's what this class is. We'll have 11 sessions of it. And thank you for being here on the first one. I've been struggling with where to start in all of this. I don't know, something's been maybe going on in my life in the last couple of weeks. I'm not sure how to describe it or what to say, and certainly would, maybe it's just indigestion, but it could be more than that. I wouldn't say to you that the Lord has been speaking to me, although He always is. I've been really concerned, and this has been showing up on Sunday morning, and we hit it really hard. And I don't want to just repeat what we've been doing, on Wednesday night, but we really hit it hard Wednesday night. And that was, I'm really concerned, especially in relationship to this course, and maybe that's where this is coming from, is as we're thinking about that we don't just study about Jesus. That we don't just go back to the historical Jesus. He was a historical person. There isn't any doubt about that. Had a birth certificate, had a grandpa. So we're dealing with a real, live, functioning individual who walked the histories of the world, which is one of the phenomenal things about Jesus, that he actually came and dipped into the time, came and became a part of the time factor, which is our history. So we're not negating that. We're not saying that isn't good, that isn't right. But we have a tendency just to study that. And we have a tendency or put him into a theological bracket where we're studying the theology about Jesus, or we're studying the doctrine of Christ, or those kind of things. But to actually have a present tense Jesus who's here in this room right now, and we're saying, okay, Lord, reveal yourself. We want to investigate you, who you are, what you want to be in our lives, and the kind of involvement we can have with you, which is a whole different ballgame than studying about Jesus. So, and we've been emphasizing, and we all have always been emphasizing, I think, that this is not a belief system. Christianity is not a belief system. It's not we have all of this. We talked, I think it was Wednesday night, about all the garbage that's over here, that kind of thing. And I'd like to filter through all of that and come back to the reality of this person who wants to embrace your life. And what I would really, the goal of this time together would be that when we get done with this all in the 11 weeks, you would say, I know more facts about Jesus, or I have a clearer picture of who Jesus was, although all of those would be good, but that you would walk out of here saying, man, I'm closer to him. I see his face clearer. I feel his presence more. I know him better than I did. That would be the goal. And another goal in all of the classes, and I want to go back to this for a moment before we actually get into this, is the idea of saturation. All of our courses are designed, except maybe the theology of evangelism or of holiness, are designed to bring us back to this. We are going to be looking at Matthew chapter 1 and 2. So I would ask you a question. Those of you who went through this course, how are you doing in your saturation? The goal of this course on saturation was that you would come out of that course hooked on this idea, and that you would begin to, that this would so infiltrate your heart and mind that you would begin on your own to develop a life pattern of saturation. And of course, in saturation, we talk about two factors. We talk about saturating in His presence and saturating in His Word. And you cannot saturate in His presence without ending up saturating in His Word. And if you can saturate in His Word without His presence, but you'll get off. So the saturation is an intertwining of the Scriptures and this concept. So I want to encourage you to take chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the book of Matthew and just begin to live in it. And maybe you're working on something else, and if you are, that's fine. But I would encourage you just to take chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Matthew and just begin to go over it and over it and over it, and we'll be talking about it every night. We'll be getting into the sections of those to discover who Jesus is. Because it's in chapter 1 and chapter 2 that Matthew sets the foundation for everything that's going, and becomes the explanation for everything that he's going to say in the rest of the book. So that's why we're hitting chapters 1 and chapter 2 really strong. So I invite you to begin to saturate in that. And I don't know, again, how you saturate, but saturation means the idea of just soaking in those passages. Just go over them and over them and over them, and write notes on them, and what's the information about them, and what's he saying, and why did he say that, and begin to pick up and allow Jesus to speak to you. And the purpose of saturation, of course, in the Scriptures is that you would see Jesus. So the revelation of Jesus comes out of that. So I want to encourage you in that. And maybe you've slacked off. If you had this course, maybe you've slacked off and haven't really followed through. Well, I want to encourage you to do it. This is not a bawling out. This is an encouragement. This is hopefully stimulate you in it. There's so much. The Scriptures is in levels. There isn't any doubt about that. It's in layers. And you can skim the surface. You can read it one time and, wow, that's okay. But there's something beneath that first level. But you can't get there unless you stay there. And we've used the illustration before of being in a boat going across the lake, and it's fine. You get a little water splash in your face. You see a few things. Hey, it's really nice. But you could get on scuba gear, and you could go down, because there's a lot going on underneath the surface. And that's true with the Scriptures. And my personal opinion is, I have no biblical basis for this. Maybe this is what I desire. I don't know. But my personal opinion is, I think this book is going to be in heaven. I think this has such power and such communication in it. I think it is so divinely inspired that this is not going to pass away with this world. I think this book right here, this actual book right here, is going to be in heaven, and that we're going to spend eternity just digging into the revelations that are going on in this thing. I don't think we've even begun to understand what is contained here. So, just a little encouragement on that. Matthew chapter 1 and chapter 2 is kind of going to be the focus. But to start tonight, I want to focus you again on the person of Jesus. And please make this interactive if you've got something you want to say or questions you want to ask. And I would take you, first of all, to Mark, if you would go there with me, to chapter 3. There's an interesting scene. Mark, of course, is an altogether different gospel than Matthew and Luke and John. John is a philosophical approach. Luke is an approach to the Gentiles. Matthew, of course, is writing to the Jews. But Mark is an action chapter, is an action book. He's not interested in details. He eliminates details. For instance, he gives nothing on the birth of Christ at all. I mean, that to him was a waste of time, or if he didn't think it was a waste of time, he at least didn't include it. So for whatever reason he didn't include it, he pushed all that aside, and he begins his gospel with John preaching, John the Baptist preaching. So you're into the full adult ministry of John and Jesus being baptized and moving on. He doesn't give, he shortens the stories. He doesn't give details. Luke gives lots of details, and of course he's a doctor and he's interested in all this. But Luke or Mark just roars through it, and you're just trying to catch your breath as he goes from one to the other. So that applies when you come to chapter 3. And when you end up in chapter 3, you've got in verse 7 this great multitude that are following Jesus, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him, and from Judea and Jerusalem and so forth. So this crowd was made up, we know, at one point of 5,000. So can you imagine just 5,000 men, besides women and children, just roving around the countryside following you around? And that's seemingly what was going on. Luke calls them disciples. And it was out of that group of those, this multitude that followed Jesus around, that Jesus chose the 12 apostles out of that group. So this large crowd's coming around, miracles are taking place, he's feeding them, and all of this stuff is happening. And eventually, you know what happens. Jesus gets fed up to hear with it and says, hey, you're not buying into this, you're not getting a hold of this, you're not seeing what I'm really about and doing. And he said some hard things to them, and off they went. So he was so impressed by that he turned to his disciples and said, are you going to leave too? Are you going to leave also? And they said, well, we have nowhere else to go. You alone have the words of life. So the crowd thing was a real issue with Jesus. So now in verse 13 of chapter 3 of Mark, he goes up on this mountain, and he called to him those he himself wanted, and they came to him. Then he appointed 12, that they might be with him, that he might send them out to preach and to have power to heal diseases and to cast out demons. Now, if you work on this passage in reverse, you start, the last of it is the idea of ministry. So obviously, the entire purpose of the apostles, of him calling them to himself, of him selecting them, of him of them being with him, and all that's going on in here is that this might take place, ministry. And I would say that's pretty fundamental. Now he breaks that down in preaching, healing, and the demon possession thing, the demons, which has, so this has to do with proclamation. This has to do with physical involvement, the physical needs, and this has to do with the spiritual life of the individual himself. So ministry pretty well is summarized up in these three things. And what God wants to do in your life, and we know that while this was 12 who were called, I get that, and that there are special callings. When you get into Ephesians, there are special callings for special functions within the realm of the body, and we understand that. But everybody is called. I'm telling you, you are called. God has called you, and he has called you to this right here. The ultimate end of everything he wants to do in and through you, and of your relationship with him. In other words, if there is a living, functioning, moving person called Jesus who's in this room right now, and we are embracing him, knowing him, and interacting with him, what does he want to do with us? This right here. And we've said this before, he's not wanting to make me happy. He's not wanting to solve my problems. He's not wanting to get me out of a mess. He's not wanting to clear up my confusion, although he does all of that. And that's the marvelous thing about it. But that's not the focus. The focus is he wants to come in the middle of my life, and yeah, he's going to solve my problems for the purpose of, he's going to clear up my confusion for the purpose of, he's going to get involved in my life for the purpose of, and everything flows back to ministry. And it isn't that he wants to use me. See, you got to get out of the mind. You got to get out of the mindset of the world, because everybody's got an angle and they're trying to use me. I know, but wouldn't it be something if Jesus is so interested in you that he knows that the fulfillment of his life in you and the fulfillment of his destiny and dream for you will be found here? And there's lots of ways to explain that. Yes, sir. We got the microphone.
So am I gathering this correctly? When you're saying, like, use us in different ways, we're going to minister as individuals instead of a whole?
Yes. As a whole and as an individual. In other words, the focus of the person of Jesus bringing you into himself ultimately is going to be, you are going to know his heart. And if you know him and his heart, you're going to become an expression of that, which is going to be focused here. See, you cannot focus on yourself and be a Christian. You cannot. You can't be all wrapped up in yourself. You can't come to Jesus and say, oh, I want to know you. Why? Because I don't want to get sick, and I want to be wealthy, and I want my kids to have straight teeth, and I want. Well, you're not going to get to know him. So you have to come to Jesus and lay yourself out and say, what do you want to do in my life? And he is going to, and in that, see, this is the old principle. When you lose your life, you find it. See, when I quit thinking about myself and I begin to think about others, wow, something happens in me. And I find fulfillment. I find life. I had all of these problems, man, all of these problems. And then I took this church as their pastor, and I said, well, I'm going to have to set these problems aside for a moment and begin to focus on the church and what can we do and how can we minister. And I got so wrapped up in this that finally when I got time to come back to my problems, they were gone. It's that kind of deal. Now, don't let this scare you, this preaching thing scare you, because everybody proclaims. This is not necessarily mouth. One of the great saints had a follower who loved to hear him preach. And the great saint got up that morning and said, we're going to go preach. And the follower was so excited because it would be a great day. And so he followed him, and they walked around town, and he helped some old lady carry some packages, and he played with some kids, and he did this and he did that. And they just walked around town all day and came back. And he said, I thought we were going to go preach. The saint said, we did. We did. So this proclamation idea is, see, you are always proclaiming what's inside of you. And that's a scary thought. See, your attitude, how you approach things, how you respond, what's going on in your work, how you respond within the context of your work, how you handle yourself. All of that is a proclamation. It's a proclamation of where you are and what's going on inside of you. So the deal here is in this Christology idea of who Jesus is that he is not back there 2,000 years ago. He was. Again, see, when I say that, I don't want you to think I don't know that. I do know that. But I want you to know that the apostles in the book of Acts were always talking about the present tense Jesus who's here right now and wants to interact with your life. And if he does, well, this is going to take place. And the physical need thing is that this is proclaimed through meeting the physical needs. And we've talked about that. Say, I don't care whether the homeless get fed or not. I don't care whether they starve or not. What I care about is this, but in order to do this, we do this. So this becomes a platform upon which the preaching takes place. Because if a guy is hungry, he's not going to listen to you. So you feed him so he'll listen to you. So he begins to get an expression of the Jesus who's within you. So meeting physical needs, which is the healing idea, meeting the physical needs of individuals becomes the platform for the proclamation. And of course, the whole demonic spiritual life. See, I think all of us, myself included, are going to end up in the world to come and are going to be amazed at the overwhelming war that was going on in the physical or in the spiritual realm, the unseen world. I think right now, if you could see into the unseen world and know what's going on in the atmosphere and what we're involved in, you would be amazed at the battle that's raging. And it's much more, just to be honest with you, it's much more since we became a compassionate ministry church and a life recovery center. It's much more. When we had a nice upper middle class church with nice families coming, we were all so comfortable. But when you begin to grab guys who have spiritual problems and overwhelming needs and a recovery center, that's frontline stuff. So you guys are on the front lines in this. And I don't want to reflect on other churches, but there's lots of comfortable churches down the road, but we're not a comfortable church. We're in the middle of a war. And I feel that. So, I don't know if you got anything you want to say, but when you end up where Jesus was going with his apostles, this is where he was headed right here. This is the fundamental purpose, which is the ministry idea. Everybody good? Okay. Want to say something else? Please.
Would you say that they were on the front line as well?
Yeah, because you see this, and that's what we're dealing with in the book of Acts on Sunday morning. This was Jesus never ministered he didn't fit into the high class society. See, the Jerusalem, the go to the opera, eat a $50 steak, schools, educated, double-breasted suits. See, he didn't minister there. His crowd you'd look at his crowd and they were all a bunch of handicapped people, sick people. What do you want a crowd like that for? See, that was his crowd. So that's the front line. That is frontline stuff. And so he was always into this. And the Pharisees came, you remember, and said, why are you going to this? Why are you eating and drinking with sinners? You always attend sinner parties. What's your deal? And Jesus said, the physician goes to the people who are sick. This is the front line stuff. And I want to be on the front lines. I'm interested in the front line stuff. So I'm glad to be a part. And that's not to demean anybody or belittle anybody or say we don't measure up. But guys, we have a special opportunity because God has called us like he called them. And again, you remember, I've told you a dozen times, he didn't get any of his disciples. He didn't choose any of his apostles from Jerusalem. He got them all from this crowd, which gives me hope, because that's my crowd. So good insight. Well, if you back up from that, the ministry thing, which is a very practical approach, in verse 14, he appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach. So the end result is this ministry thing. But if you back up from that, you'll note it says he appointed 12 that they might be with him. Isn't that interesting? So if you put this as the foundation, then you've got this with him thing. Well, I thought that the purpose was that Jesus wanted to send them out. Well, yeah, he wants to send them out, but they can't be sent out until they're with him. So this dynamic thing begins to take place. And of course, this is a precursor to the whole Pentecost idea, that you cannot get into this unless you're with him. And it's not with him and then he sends you out. It's a with him in the process of this. So all of this ministry thing spills out of this. And the supreme goal, the supreme essence of the Christian faith is an intimacy with this person. And I just can't stress that enough. It just really is heavy on me. That what we're dealing with is that you have got to come into an encounter, an intimacy, a oneness. Jesus has got to become more than an idea or something you believe. See, I didn't believe and then meet Jesus. I met Jesus and then I believed. See, go to the scriptures. Saul of Tarsus is tromping down the road, man, headed for Damascus to kill Christians. And Jesus knocks the socks off of him. And suddenly he's a believer. Well, sure he is. He didn't believe and then, Jesus showed up. Jesus showed up and then he believed. And it was this living person of Jesus that literally captured Saul at that time, and then Paul. And see, that's got to happen to us. And that's what spiritual experience is. So I want you to meet Jesus face to face. And I'm not talking emotion. Come on, get over that. I'm not talking about, come to an altar and cry for a half hour. I'm not talking that. I'm talking and this comes back to the saturation of Jesus becoming real in your life. I expressed this one other time, but it's worthy of expression. Here is a container, which is called self. Here you are. This is who you are right here. And you are a container. And I am full of myself. I've never had a thought that I didn't think. I've never gone any place that I didn't go. This is deep. See, I've never eaten any food that I didn't eat. I've never had any feelings that I didn't have. I've never had a desire that I didn't have that desire. I'm so involved in myself. Now, can you imagine the person of Jesus filling this container called Manley? So that as I've been involved with myself, now I'm involved with him. And that Jesus, every thought I think, he's thinking it. In fact, he may be projecting those thoughts because I now have his mind. Can you imagine every feeling I've always felt, I've felt? Wouldn't it be something if every feeling he feels, I feel? See, wouldn't it be something if I could be involved with the person of Jesus who's alive and present now as much as I've been involved with myself? That's Christianity, guys. See, that's so much bigger than theology. It's just, and when that begins to take place, ministry happens because we've been with him. So what we're wanting, and I said to, I don't know whether it was this congregation or another, but I just want to reach out and grab a hold of you and just pull you into Jesus. Just keep dragging you into Jesus. Just with me. I want you to go with me into Jesus and more Jesus and more Jesus. That's the goal. So we're not money driven. We're not prestige driven. We're not fame driven. We don't want to be the biggest church in town. We're not interested in, they're going to write articles about us in the newspaper. We're interested in, that's what we're interested in. And that all comes back to this with him thing. So with him, out of with him comes this. Any thoughts? Okay. Any thoughts? Do I see thoughts? Feel free. Okay. Now, if you back up from that, it says, verse 14 of chapter 3, then he appointed 12 that they might be with him, that he might send them out to minister. So, you got this bottom line of preaching, of ministry. Then you've got the next one is with him, and the one just before that is appointed, which is the idea, of course, of chosen or sent. It's the apostolos thing, which means sent one. And the idea is that the one who is sent in their day, the word apostle or apostolos, was the sent one, and it was the idea that the one who is sent is the same as the one who sent him. So when you are sent, it's like the ambassador thing. I'm an ambassador for the United States, which means I represent. So the one, and all the power of the United States rests in me in this foreign land. I'm an ambassador. I'm sent. So Jesus was choosing these guys to be with him for the sake of ministry, and he chose them. He appointed them. And the word appointment, I like that word because it has the idea of specific. It has the idea of thought through. It has the idea of I've calculated. I've read your resume. I've looked you over, and I'm choosing you. So Jesus chose these guys for what purpose? To be with him. And out of that was going to come ministry. But this becomes the focus right here, to be with him. He wanted them to be with him. And that's one of the things that irritates me a little bit, I guess, about some of the evangelical church of today, is that a lot of guys, we love these titles things, we love these titles. What's your title? Oh, I'm a prophet. What's your title? Well, I'm a bishop. What's your title? I'm an apostle. What does that mean? Do you know what that means when somebody says they're an apostle? I have no idea what it means. I know what this means here, that when I'm an apostle, I am totally his to be with him and sent. And this becomes the outflow of that. So the idea of chosen is really, really significant. Yes, sir. Microphone. Thank you.
I noticed that some of the translations use a term different than with him, but in the Greek there is no other English word that is properly translated other than with him.
Wow.
So you're not emphasizing it
Enough.
necessarily.
Yeah, not emphasizing it enough, are we? Yeah. Yeah, well, wow. Now, you back up from that. Oh, want to say something?
No, I was just making sure it was all.
Okay. You back up from that, see, in verse 14, and this is a saturation process. See, I'm not doing anything you can't do. If you spend time on it. He sent them out to preach. Why? Before he did that, they were with him. Before he did that, he appointed them. Before they did that, you could say they came to him. And they came to him, then he appointed them. So there's a coming involved. Now, I don't, will not get off, I don't want to get off on predestination and all that in this, because this is not going to happen unless you come to him. And you're not going to come to him unless he chooses you. And he's going to choose you to be with him, and then this will happen. But biblically, he has chosen you. There is no way you can weasel out of that. I can take you to dozens of scriptures that say he's chosen you. You know in your heart he's chosen you. In fact, you struggle with the fact of why would he choose me, which means he's chosen you. Talk to me, man.
So you said earlier that everybody's called, and there's a verse that says, many are called, but few are chosen. What do you make of that?
Yeah, what do you make of that? That's an interesting passage, isn't it? I haven't studied that in its context, so anything I say would be off the top of my head. Well, I think he's called everybody, but he chooses the ones who do this. In other words, the choosing, this apostles thing, this choosing, this sent, this appointed deal, is a deeper investment. In other words, if you're not going to come to me, then I'm not going to invest design, purpose, involvement in your case, in who you are. You just go your way, and I'll focus on the ones who have come to me. So I come to him, and then he gives me he invests all of this in me, which is for the purpose of being with him, for the purpose of ministry, which is beautiful. I love this, and I want to come to him. And the coming to him, that's one of the breakdowns in all of this. The coming to him is, I wish he'd have made it harder, more difficult. And what I mean by that, maybe it's so difficult now we can't do it, but what I mean by that is I wish he'd have made it, and I don't really, but I have a tendency to want it to be some kind of physical thing. So to come to him is to physically join our church. And it's not that. It's an inner attitude of, okay. Do you realize that that's all there is to salvation? Okay. Which is way too simple. See, what do I have to do? Well, count beads and go over the rosary and, cross yourself and whatever. We want to do something. I'll be a missionary, and it's simply come to him. But then, see, that goes with this. Why would he want you to come to him? Because he wants to be with you. So, and in the middle of this, there's this. which brings about this. So it's beautiful. But again, we're focusing not on an historical Jesus of, we're not coming to a belief system, see? We're not coming to an organization. See, I would not care, really, I'm serious, if everybody in this town, some way, somehow, we could get through to every individual in this town, and they would literally come to Jesus, and they'd all become Baptists. I don't care. I don't care. It's fine. Because the purpose is not building our church. The purpose is that they would know him. See, this is the Jesus, the present tense Jesus of this moment. Now, all of this comes out of one thing, and it's verse 13. So in verse 14, what have you got? You've got the preaching, the ministry, and it spills out of with him, and the with him spills out of the appointment, and the appointment spills out of the came to him, and all of that spills out of he went up on the mountain, called to him those he himself wanted. On the post office of God, in the post office of God, your picture and name and profile is on the board. You're wanted. And the Trinity God is saying to everybody, go after that guy. Go after that guy. Trace him down. Beat on his door. Go after that boy. You're wanted. Every judge in the kingdom is looking for you. Every sheriff has told his men, they've radioed, what do they call it? Dispatched out. And there's a warrant for your arrest. You're wanted. Jesus is after you. And again, we've already said this, but get the flow of this. This is not because he's in need or because he's mad or because this isn't about him, although it is because he wants you, but he wants you because it's his heart that wants to fulfill, and it isn't that he needs you to minister, it's that somehow this unity with him brings about this. And that this is the purpose. He wants you because he wants you to be with him. So, the whole idea, probably spent too much time on this, but the whole idea of Christology, of who Jesus is wrapped up in the present tense Jesus of this moment, who has set his sights on you and says, I got to have you. Okay. Anybody want to say anything? Well, let's go to Matthew's view of this. And we're just going to kind of, we don't have a lot of time left, but we're just going to kind of go over this in the beginning of Matthew. And it is really significant, again, in your saturation, as you look at chapter 1 and chapter 2. And the reason we're looking at chapter 1 and chapter 2 is, of course, that's the whole birthing thing. And we spent Christmas time on some of that. So some of this may be a repeat for you. These stories, at least, are a repeat. Because you've got Joseph and all of his dilemma and all that's going on. And by the time you get to chapter 3, of course, you're into the full-blown adult ministry of Jesus. So chapters 1 and chapter 2 formulate the foundation of how we got to the full-blown ministry, and they shape the purpose. See, what Matthew's doing is he's shaping the purpose of the life of Jesus, which really is significant. Now, as you look at what Matthew is doing, it's really easy. And I know I've been guilty of this, and it's really easy to do. It's really easy to disconnect. Is that a good way of saying it? Disconnect from the events. You become so familiar with the passages, the stories, the whatever, that you disconnect from the involvement of it. So what I'd like for you to do, to the best of your ability, is I'd like for you to somehow see in, you know how there's fads, there's trends, there's, for 2 years we've been in the COVID thing. They had all of those kind of things going on in their day. See, they had their own fads, their own trends, their own COVID, their own... and it's easy for us in this moment to feel what COVID has done to us and how it's changed, and everybody's all upset and wants to get back to normal, and the job thing and the inflation and all of this stuff that we're feeling. But you let 100 years go by, and there's a student in high school who's studying the COVID pandemic. He doesn't feel any of that because he wasn't here. See, we're doing the same thing when we read this. So I don't know how, but at least give it a shot, will you? Attempt to get into their situation and feel the strain of this and what's going on and where they are. They've just come 400 years prior to this. They came out of the Babylonian captivity. They had disobeyed God, and they were all taken out. For 70 years they were gone. Well, you know what happens in 70 years. The old people died. The middle-aged are now old. The middle-aged had kids. Those kids have grown up in captivity, have never been in Jerusalem, have never been in the homeland. They have grown up, got married. They got married to the pagans of their day in Babylon. And they developed the culture. And, of course, Israel did really well in keeping their own culture alive and Judaism and their faith secure, even in the captivity. And when they came back to Jerusalem, a remnant came back. The walls were torn down. Jerusalem, the temple was a mess. They went in, cleaned up the temple, put things back in order, began to build the wall, and they discovered that the reason they had gotten in this mess is because they had neglected the laws of God. So they determined to come back to those laws. And contained within those laws is this idea that if we will be obedient, God will birth through us a Messiah. Now, 400 years has gone by. And during that 400 years, it was a political mess. And you've studied it. I don't need to go into all of that. But see, they are strategically, Jerusalem and Palestine was strategically located. And its trade routes come through there, and every nation wants to possess it. So there was this chaos constantly. And they flipped from government to government to government, overriding them. And by the time you come here, they are overridden with Rome. Rome has conquered the world. And Palestine and Judaism is all under the domination of the Roman Empire. Now, Rome did some neat things that helped them. Rome would conquer a community, conquer a culture, and say, you don't have to dress like us. You don't have to eat what we eat. You can go ahead and maintain your culture. Just pay your taxes and don't cause trouble. So that turned Judaism loose. Yes, sir.
So when was was it after they came out of captivity that when they was focusing on the law that the Pharisees and Sadducees
Yes.
birthed, but none of them were before that?
Basically, it's interesting that up to that time, they were constantly up and down in relationship to the law, which caused all the problem. So they committed themselves at that point, and you can trace the beginnings of the Pharisaical movement back to that time when they came out of the Babylonian captivity, that they determined we will never, ever get away from the law again. And so here's this group who live for one purpose, to keep Israel focused on the law, and they were the Pharisees. And that's their seed. That's where they started. And again, they were determined in the midst of this Roman Empire, feel that, dominated by the Romans, paying taxes, and there's tax collectors, and Rome would come in, and you got the right to be a tax collector by bribing or paying a bribe to Rome, and they would say, well, you charge $5 taxes, okay, but if you want to charge 10, you can keep the other 5. So these tax collectors upped the price and made lots of money. Matthew was one of them. He was a tax collector. And the people hated him because he betrayed his own people. So feel all of that, see? There's all of this going on. Yes, sir.
So did tax collectors set the tax and they were backed by the power of Rome?
No, Rome set the tax and then they could charge what they wanted to. And the tax collector could charge what he wanted to.
And if the people didn't pay, they were in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's why it was such a well-paying job. Everybody wanted that. So there's all of those kind of dynamics are going on in this. And if you have been a small little country with not a very big army, and you've just been dominated for 400 years by all kinds of world powers, guys, you only got one shot at this. God is going to have to send a deliverer. So this idea of the Messiah, of the Christ, just flourished. Do you realize that every day the Jew got up, gathered his family, the Jewish father got up, gathered his family around him and looked at him, and the first words of the day were, could this be the day? Meaning what? Could this be the day the Messiah comes? So this Messiah idea, this king, this one who's going to come, who's going to bring deliverance to Israel, wow, it was paramount in the thoughts of all the people because it was the only chance they had. And if you can get into feeling that, here's the only shot. God has promised that there will be a king who will come, and he will sit on the throne of Judah, and he will deliver his people and set up a kingdom. And they all believe that with a passion. They believe that, and their history, their circumstance of the domination of the world powers and their political situation tells them that this is the only shot they've got at it of deliverance. Now, this king idea, and now you got to couple with that, if you can put with that, those feelings and that cry at the depth of their heart, could this be the day, or is the king going to come today? If you can feel that, that was stimulated by the scriptures. Everywhere you go in the Old Testament, you come back, the prophets are talking this. See, everybody in the scriptures, the Old Testament scriptures, is pushing this idea. So their scriptures just literally yelled at it, that there is going to be a king. For instance, the Genesis, let me read Genesis 49:10 to you. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. It was a promise of God. Listen to that again. The scepter, the ruling, shall not depart from Judah. Well, what's Judah? Well, this Jerusalem thing. It's the kingship of David. See, there was this promise that the king was going to come, and he would come right down through and be of the lineage of King David and would take David's place, and there would be a king who would reign and would bring Israel back into all that she was to be. The prophets, here's another quote. His rule shall be everlasting, eternal, forever. Wow. When David, the Bathsheba thing, Nathan the prophet came along and told David and said, your house and your kingdom shall endure before me. This was a promise from God to David after his repentance and all of that. Your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever. That's 2 Samuel. In other words, God promised David, somebody, your lineage, your seed, your house, your kingdom shall endure before me forever. And he was talking about the coming Christ. So see, they really believe that stuff. Listen to this one in Psalms. But as for me, I have installed, this is God speaking, but as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. I will surely tell of the decrees of the Lord. He said to me, thou art my son, today I've begotten thee. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as thine inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as thy possessions. So there's all this promise stuff in the Old Testament that just screams that God is going to send a king, and he will be a king. Now, Matthew, and we could just go on and on with that, but for the sake of time, we'll move on. 144 times in the New Testament, the word kingdom shows up. 35 times, the words Jesus as king shows up. 10 times, the idea of reigning, Jesus reigning, shows up in the New Testament. See, the focus. So when we're dealing with Christology, and we'll get into this more, and hopefully it'll be clearer as your understanding and experience with Jesus develops, even in this class. But there is a Trinity God, and Jesus is at the heart of the Trinity God. So while he has become man, and I get this all the time. Somebody will come along and say, well, Jesus, like Jesus isn't God. Folks, Jesus is God. Well, he's man. You're exactly right. But don't lose the fact that he is God who has become man. And that the deliverer, the one who's come to deliver us to be king, is Lord of lords and King of kings. And when he comes back the second time, he's going to become riding on a white horse and stamped on his thigh as King of kings and Lord of lords. So what we're dealing with in Jesus, in this anemic, whipped, crown of thorns, face mutilated till you can hardly recognize him, person on the middle cross, is a sovereign God. That's this Jesus. And he has come as a king. He is the king. Now, Matthew cannot get away from that. For instance, he begins with the genealogy, which is the ancestry of Jesus. I spell it right? C-E-S. Oh, no N in there. Which is the ancestry, the genealogy. So, and you need to saturate in that genealogy. And I know, you look at chapter 1, Matthew, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot. And isn't it interesting? He presents the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Then begins Abraham, and he's going to deal later on verse 6. David comes into the picture. But he starts with the idea he's the son of David, which is this Judah thing, which is this promise from God that the king is going to come and he will be the son of David. See, that was uppermost, absolutely had to be. You had to trace your genealogy. If you were even going to begin to claim the messiahship, you had to trace your genealogy through King David. Because David was the one that Jesus promised he would reign on the throne forever. So there is a king who is reigning. So when you are approaching this babe, when you are approaching this Jesus who's dealing with the multitudes, when you are approaching this Jesus who is crucified on a cross, you are approaching the sovereign king of the universe. And Matthew will not let you get away from that. So Jesus is the king. Want to say anything? Yes, sir. Oh, microphone. Sorry.
Just for what it's worth, looking at the environment at the time, throw in the fact that messiahs were a dime a dozen. There were dozens, perhaps hundreds, maybe even thousands of people that came up along the way and said, I'm the Messiah. But as many years ago, a Jewish friend of mine said, but they lacked one thing that Jesus had. And I thought, oh boy. And he said, Saul.
Saul?
Paul.
Oh, Paul.
So he gives the credit to Paul.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, which tells you, if that's true, and was, that tells you that there was this heart's cry in their culture for a king. And they knew that the only shot they had at this was that God had to send a deliverer to them. And so they were looking at it. Yes, sir.
And I would take that a step further and say there's a heart cry in all of us for a king.
Whew.
Because when you look, the Jews demanded a king back in the day. And God's like, I'm your king. What's wrong with me? And so he gave him Saul, right? But I think all of us.
Yeah. Good point, brother. Good point. So it's no coincidence, see, that he starts out with this genealogy and gives the ancestry of this king. And the very ancestry of Jesus promotes the idea that he's a king. Then he moves, that's chapter 1, verse 1 through 17. And we'll talk more about that at a later time. Then he moves to the Genesis, the beginning, his arrival, which is 1:18 through 25. Now, what he's going to do is, he's going to begin to give you the content of the kingship. In other words, Jesus has come. He's going to be a king. Wow, that's great. Going to be the deliverer. Wow, that's great. But what kind of deliverer is he? And he begins to even develop that in this passage. He's going to be born of peasant people in a stable in an inn that had no room for him, in a society that was torn apart. He is coming. And so you get this story, this dilemma, this Joseph thing that we've dealt with before in verse 18 down through the end of the chapter. And of course, again, don't forget the prophecy idea. And we've talked about that before, that in every one of these, there's this constant reference to prophecy. That he had no earthly father. His arrival, his genesis, his beginning is no earthly father. It's divine blood flowing through his veins. He is Emmanuel, God with us, because he is the messianic king. So you get that strongly. Then you move to chapter 2, and in chapter 2, you get the guest. His astrologers. This is chapter 2, verse 1 through 12. These wise guys show up from the east. Now, that's really significant, people. Because one thing, it tells you several things, but one thing it tells you is that this is a universal. This is not a little Jewish deal. This is God has come to deliver the world. Because even the pagans are getting in on this. And an announcement was not just made to the Jews that the king is coming, and it was not a little isolated thing for their little culture. It was the Babylonian society and culture of the world. The stars talked about it. So you've got these wise men who are coming, proposing the fact that there is a new king on the scene. Now, and we'll again talk more about that as well, because the wise men were the people who were the makers of the kings. And it's significant that they have come to bow at the feet of a king they did not make. So you've got that whole scene taking place in chapter 2, which is just beautiful. Then you've got what I'm calling the guidelines of his kingship, his authentication, which is chapter 2, verse 13 through 23. And you've got the guidelines laid out because you've got war declared. I mean, right off the start. The war has been declared in the Old Testament for sure, but it certainly tells you as you move into the Herod thing, the killing of the baby boys, the demonic movement to destroy the kingship becomes really strong, really, really strong. And yet, it doesn't faze the plan of God. He marches on and does what he wants to do, and he is the winner in all of this. So they've tried to destroy him, usurp his throne, and do away with it all to non-success. Then when you come into, let me show you where he goes with this. When you come into chapter 3, you've got the going before, which is his announcer. That is chapter 3, 1 through 12. Now, this is if you're getting this is a part of the process of saturation, is that you take a paragraph and you try to find the core issue of why he put it there. What's he trying to tell us in that paragraph, and how does it fit into the rest of it? Well, here he's giving us John the Baptist. And what's John the Baptist doing? He's announcing the kingship. He's come. He's here. So the announcement of this to the whole Jewish world is suddenly set before them. He's the herald who's come with the trumpet blowing and saying, he's coming after me, one that I'm not worthy to even touch his sandals, tie his shoes. And so John the Baptist is on the scene, and what a revival was going on. We have no idea how strong that thing was. Then you move to, this is chapter 3, verse 13. Jesus is baptized. And what's that all about? It's the guarantee. His advocate. Can you imagine what would have happened if God had become man and operated on the strength of man? Well, we would all been in a mess. But he became a man who operated on the fullness of God, which is what we're to do. And as we are not on our own, he was not on his own. So the guarantee that this kingship would follow through and he would really deliver the world is the fact that the Spirit of God filled the man. So Jesus is going to be operating out. You have no idea how significant that is. I've been looking at the material from the Journey Church and some other material as well. I got a book the other day down at the jail, Who Jesus Is. I looked through that thing to see what they said. And it's interesting that they all talk about Jesus operating out of his omniscience and out of his omnipotence. In other words, Jesus walks on water. Well, how does he do that? Because he's God. And I'm saying to you, that's not how he did that. How he did that, he was a man who was filled with God. And that the miracles he didn't do because he was God. He did those because he was a man filled with God. And that's a big shift. See, if I look you in the eye and say, you ought to be like Jesus, you're going to look back at me and say, well, that's ridiculous. Because Jesus was God and I can't be God. But if Jesus, who was God, didn't operate out of his godness, but operated out of humanity filled with God, then I can be that. Because Jesus was filled with the Spirit of God, and the resource that made him who he was the Spirit of God. I can have that same identical Spirit living within me. And that was the guarantee that it filled him. And that is a crucial issue in the Scriptures. And when you read the gospel accounts and read Jesus, not as operating as out of his godness, but operating out of his humanity filled with God, that changes everything in the passages. Okay. So every one of the Gospels record this thing right here. And Matthew hits it hard and says, yeah, Jesus is a king. But what kind of a king is he? He is a king who has set aside every advantage he has and is going to he is a king who's surrendering, yielding himself to the resource of the Father. And he's going to enter into a merger, an intimacy with the Father that's going to make him the adequate king of the kingdom to come. Now, you move from there to the guile, his attack. Well, if he's such a hot shot, if he's so powerful, if he's filled with the resource of God, how are you going to know? Well, we're going to throw him to the wolves. And in chapter 4, verse 1 through 11, what have you got? The wilderness temptation. 40 solid days, overwhelming battle, face to face, nose to nose with the devil. If you're such a hotshot king who's filled with the Spirit of God, have the roaring power of the Father within you, how do you do? Are you victorious? He was. He was. Then you move to the gift. His assistance, which is chapter 4, verse 12 through 25, which is all about ministry. And when you look at this section, the key issue in the section is this idea of compassion. He had compassion upon the multitudes. He saw them. He was torn up. So the kingdom does not live for itself. The king is not here to build his own kingdom for the sake of his own ego. He isn't here for people to serve him. He's here to serve the people. It's a different kind of kingship. And then you go to the gospel, his announcement. Which is chapter 5, 6, and 7, which is the Sermon on the Mount, which is the manifesto of what the kingdom is all about, of how the king rules. So you can see that Matthew is just absolutely focused on the idea that Jesus is a king. And his whole gospel presents Jesus as king of the kingdom. And he lays that out. Now, chapters 1, chapters 2 are the heart of that. So, if you say, we got 10 minutes. If you say to me, okay, what of it? Well, the what of it is he your king? That's the what of it. And it's easy to give lip service. It's easy to come to church and sing, give lip service, say he's Lord. Sure, I know Jesus is a king. But it's another thing to take your life and bend it under the authority of this person who's right here. Well, he's going to come the second time, and yeah, he'll rule and run the show. Yeah, that's all true. But see, that's there. Well, yeah, he was king. Yeah, but that's back there. What we're talking about is the Jesus who's right here in this room with us right now, and bending my life under the authority of that person. That's a big transition, isn't it? The reason it's such a big transition is because when Jesus becomes king of my life, everything that doesn't line up with who he is begins to yell. Oh, just begins to scream in my life. Every attitude in me that doesn't line up with the attitude of the king begins to just grind. Don't know how to explain it to you. Every thought that just doesn't match his thought process just begins to So when we're talking about kingship and coming under his authority, we're talking about being so infiltrated with who he is that who he is begins to dominate the whole flow of my life. Lord, I don't know how you're going to get that done in my life, but I invite you to do that. I invite you to become so present and so forceful and so dominant that everything that's not like you is pushed out. And that every emotion, every attitude, every thought process, every body drive, everything that's going on in my life would somehow come under the control of your kingly presence. And when it was all said and done, I would just shake my head and say, I know you. You, the King. Thank you for being who you are. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thanks for your patience.